Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Montessori Makers Podcast, the Montessori Microphone. Today, I've got Pam Shanks here with me. She is an amazing author. We first crossed paths via LinkedIn. I recognized that we had some folks in our past that we had worked with in common, so I was really excited to learn more about her. I got a copy of her book and was so excited to read it. I've learned so much myself, and I'm really excited for her to share some information about the book and how she got there and some of the things that she knows with all of our fabulous listeners. Welcome, Pam, to the Montessori Makers Podcast, Montessori Microphone. Thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, Hannah.
Great. I'm so glad that you're here today. I have read your book. I was so excited to connect with you via LinkedIn. I recognize we had some folks in our past that were in common. And I'm just so excited to share the information that I've learned from this book with the community via this podcast. So I'd love to ask you some questions about how you got to this space and some of the things that you've learned. So is it okay if I jump in and ask you a few things?
That sounds great. Let's begin.
Great. So before becoming an author, you were a Montessori educator. Was there a specific aha moment that pushed you to write this handbook?
Yes, there really was, and I want to answer that question. But before we dig in, I want to explain some of the language that I'm going to be using today. Except when talking about a name associated with a diagnosis, I will be using the term differences rather than disability or disorder. And there are a couple of reasons for this choice. The first is that not all differences are limiting or impairing. For example, there are a lot of strengths and benefits that come with a diagnosis of ADHD. People with that diagnosis are really quite spontaneous in ways that I never could be. They have high energy, they're really social and creative, and they have an incredible ability to hyper-focus on tasks in which they're really interested, preferred tasks. They have traits and abilities that their more typically developing learners around them may not have. Another reason for this intentional choice is that it better describes the wide range of differences that students do experience, from impacts that are really quite mild to those that are severe and life-altering. So that term differences will include, for me, in my definition, both mild impacts to severe life-altering impacts. And back to your question, my master's program happened to be a dual emphasis program with an emphasis both in early childhood special education and severe multiple disabilities. From the beginning of my master's work, I was involved with students who had low incident disabilities. And that means disabilities that just don't occur very frequently in the general population. My first inclusive experience was with children who experienced severe and multiple disabilities. And as a goal, as a teacher, my goal for each of these students and for every student in my class was to honor their needs and strengths, no matter their abilities. And because of my degree and certifications and work with the University of Kansas on various federal grants and statewide projects, I had an incredible opportunity to work with a wide variety of learners over the course of my career. From, again, those who had differences that were quite mild to those with very severe and everything in between. This book, I really wanted to focus on the conditions that are most commonly seen in classrooms today. That meant I had to include conditions that were somewhat hidden or not as well understood, like CVI, which happens to impact 1 in 30 children in the U.S. It's not a well-known condition, but it is a frequently occurring developmental difference. And so for me, that aha moment was the fact that I could take some of these conditions that weren't as well known, give information about them, but more importantly, empower teachers to help children who were displaying characteristics in their behaviors in the classroom that might mean they are experiencing these sorts of problems.
And that was so important. You actually answered one of my next questions already. You mentioned that Montessori guides really don't need a diagnosis in order to start supporting students. How do you balance intervention with Montessori principle of following the child without labels?
I think that's a great question. I firmly believe that waiting until a child is diagnosed is the wrong approach. It's too late. Montessori teachers have the advantage of our materials and our methodology that have lasted the test of time, right? Montessori teachers are really good at knowing when something is wrong, long before a diagnosis might ever even be a thought, much less a reality. And that's because Montessori teachers are astute observers of children's work, actions, and interactions. They are truly following the child. In order to truly follow the child, we have to pay attention to that feeling that something is just a little off or different about a child's development. So I define 6 essential characteristics of Montessori classroom-based interventions that explain how we can follow children even before they have a label. Number 1, interventions have to be simple. They have to be easy to understand and implement. I wanted to keep this book really practical and pragmatic and easy for any educator or Montessori guide to use. Montessori classroom-based interventions have to be flexible. They have to be easily adjusted and removed based on the child's response because we believe in observation in guiding what we do with children. So as we observe children's response to the intervention, that informs our response, and we have to be flexible in how we respond, depending on what we observe. Montessori classroom-based interventions also have to be selected carefully and based on understanding the whole child, including their background information, as well as any observations of work, actions, and interactions. We're going to use that information intentionally to select interventions, just like we use it to select next lessons, so that we can address observed or identified needs. And then Montessori classroom-based interventions have to be focused. They're really designed to be focused on enhancing children's ability to use materials, to participate in activities and interactions with others. And when that happens, that leads to work within the child's classroom community, allowing children to demonstrate their learning and development, just like their peers do as they work with the materials and interact with others. I also felt like Montessori classroom-based interventions had to be research-informed. Anything I was asking people to do had to be supported by research and based on best practice techniques or those that are really effective and successful support strategies. The most important thing, the 6th characteristic, is that Montessori classroom-based interventions have to maintain fidelity to the Montessori method. That doesn't mean they're not useful outside of Montessori, but it does help assure that authentic Montessori experience. They maintain the authenticity of the Montessori experience. And as Montessorians, everything we do to help children who are struggling or presenting observable developmental differences has to be grounded by and aligned with our methodology. And when we do that, we truly are following the child.
So true. And this book is so rich and so full of information. It includes 47 strategies just in chapter 5. Can you share one surprisingly simple intervention that is outsized impact?
Sure. So before talking about specific interventions, it's important to understand that anytime you're worried about a child's learning, you need to make sure they've had a recent vision and hearing screening. These 2 important information gathering systems are critical to learning. As a part of understanding the whole child, we need to know those systems are intact and are working optimally. If a child needs glasses, learning is going to be harder. If a child has a hearing impairment, learning is going to be harder. So making sure that those information gathering systems are intact is important. I will say that chapter 5, which you referenced in your question, on a disorder called cortical visual impairment or CVI, that was really the most fun chapter for me to write because I've long felt there was a connection between cortical visual impairment, often called CVI, and learning disabilities. But I never could find any research that confirmed that link. Occasionally I'd go online or go to a library and begin to look and search, and I could never find anything until I began this new round of information research for chapter 5. CVI is an impairment of the brain's ability to convert images into information that can be interpreted and then acted on. CVI do have normal vision, or their vision can be corrected with glasses or contacts, and the visual input is sent to the brain, and that's where the problems begin. The brain struggles to process that information. The result is an impaired ability to organize or act on that visual information. How this affects academic skills. I mean, if a child's brain struggles to process visual information, that means reading, penmanship, composition, mathematics, everything is going to be impacted on that academic side. But it's important to understand that CVI can also impact social skills. So it really impacts the child's entire classroom experience. So in order to help a child with CVI, we want to focus on making visual targets easier for the brain to locate, attend to, and respond to. For example, I see the pink color tablet, I attend to it, I process that information, and I respond pink when asked to name the color. Or I see the sandpaper letter C, I attend to it, I process it, and I respond when asked what it says. I see the numerals 6 and 5 in the problem 6 times 5 equals. I can attend to that, I can process it, and I can respond 6 times 5 equals 30. Or perhaps I see a friend's face fall. I attend to her facial expression and body language. I process those images, and then I respond by apologizing or correcting the false impression I gave in our conversation. There is a simple intervention that supports a child's ability to locate, attend to, and process visual images, and that is to place a black mat underneath their work. This intervention, when used in combination with several others described in the book, can really make an instant difference. It's the one thing that feels like magic in the book when you begin using it. It makes an instant difference in children's ability to demonstrate knowledge if they're truly being impacted by CVI. Using a black mat under children's work, such as sandpaper letters, numerals, a book, or the stamp game, resolves what is called visual complexity. Visual complexity is created when an image is viewed against a complex background. For example, the busy background of a classroom, or a visually busy surface like a plaid tablecloth, or in Montessori classrooms, the wood grain of a table. Visual complexity can also be created when a surface bounces light back at the eye, because that creates glare. Glare is a fundamental problem for any learner with a visual impairment and for learners with cortical visual impairment, which is that problem processing visual information. So imagine headlights at night, or as you're driving, or trying to watch a soccer game or another outdoor event while facing the setting sun. Your vision is harder to use due to glare. That's why we put on sunglasses to help control that glare. A visually complex background or glare will make locating, attending to, and processing visual images harder for children who are struggling. And that negatively impacts their ability to name or identify a visual image like a numeral or a letter. It negatively affects memorization and learning. And so preventing visual complexity is a key support strategy for learners with or those who you might suspect to have CVI. So how does that black mat figure into preventing visual complexity? Black is very useful in controlling glare. Visible light is made up of the entire range of colors. Think of the rainbow that you see when a light passes through prism. The prism breaks the light into its pieces, which are all the colors of the rainbow. Black, on the other hand, absorbs all the colors of the visible light spectrum. Sorry, that's what black does. But white, on the other hand, reflects all the colors of the visible light spectrum. So black absorbs color, white reflects it. And that reflection creates glare as light is bounced off the eye. So even a light-colored wooden table, it's not uncommon when you go into Montessori classrooms to see very blonde stained wood. And that is much closer to white than it is to black, right? And so that reflection can create a glare as the light is bounced back at the eye. Using a mat under work to neutralize the background of wooden tables prevents interference from visually complex grain of the wood table. And using a mat, and specifically that black mat under children's work, means that light is absorbed rather than bouncing back at the eye. So visual processing is so much easier, making practice therefore more efficient and effective. And making practice efficient and effective, of course, means that learning is enhanced. And that's why these results can be immediately observed. And it also explains one of the reasons that black or a deep green chalkboard is so much better for struggling learners than a whiteboard. Whiteboards are both white and shiny. They reflect that glare back at the eye. So controlling visual complexity can really have an outsized impact for struggling learners. And that's why I felt the link between learning disorders and CVI really had to be included in my book. It's information that I feel every educator should know, Montessori or not. because supporting visual processing is really simple and easy, and it can have a transformational impact on learning.
100%. I can't tell you over the years how many whiteboards I've seen creeping into Montessori environments and others for that matter. And this is really easy to digest the way that you're explaining it. Can you give us one of the non obvious signs of CVI that teachers might miss?
Sure. One sign of CVI that's easy to miss, at least until you know what you're looking for, and then you'll see it all the time, is a frequent use of an unusual gaze pattern. Children with CVI will often look through or just past an object, a person, or an image. And we all do that. Think about talking with someone in a conversation. If you try to stare deeply into someone's eyes for a prolonged period of time, you get that urge to shift your gaze. You look away. And that shift, that urge to shift your gaze, comes much more quickly for children with CVI, and it's much stronger. And it doesn't happen just with people in conversation, it happens with any viewing of any image. So you're going to see these children take visual breaks. They're going to look away from materials for extended periods of time. And they might also need extra time to shift their visual attention. I distinctly remember a 3-year-old in my classroom, and presenting practical life for her in the beginning was so hard. I just could not get her to even engage visually in looking at the materials. Sometimes even waiting and sitting quietly with my hands on my lap, it still was hard for her to shift her vision to those materials. Later, she struggled to learn letters and numerals. And now looking back, I understand that she probably had CVI and I just didn't understand it or know what to do. Using both formal and informal observation can help you look for differences in how children are using their vision, and especially how they gaze or look at materials, people, and things.
Thank you. Thank you for that. One of the things that you advocate for is pairing visual tasks with motor activities. How does this align with or challenge the traditional Montessori material design?
Yeah, I think that's an important question to think about. We do all know that Dr. Montessori was a genius at observation. She could observe children, she could analyze how they learn during and through her observation, and use those observations to create materials to support the process of learning. Dr. Montessori told us that the hand is the instrument of intelligence, and she understood that the hand was integral to brain development. In The Observant Mind, she says intelligence can develop to a certain level without the help of the hand, but if it develops with the hand, then the level it reaches is higher. She also told us that what the hand does, the mind remembers. So pairing visual memory tasks with motor activities is the basis of her methodology. I'm not asking you to do anything new. So for example, the sensorial materials offer a range of materials that allow children to develop and refine their sense of sight. But the children are always using both their hands and their eyes together. When you think of the pink tower, the knob cylinder, the color tablets, it's visual motor, hand-eye. And that continues into the academic materials. The younger the child, the more concrete the environment and the materials contained within it. Learning involves the hand. And certainly that changes as children age and become less dependent on concrete learning and more involved in learning abstractly. But for learners who are struggling, we have to remember that their need for a concrete hands-on approach in order to support memorization and learning may hang on a little longer than their peers. So I think pairing visual memory tasks with motor activities is not only very aligned with Montessori methodology, but also very important way to support learners who are struggling.
So, within my work, I work with school leaders pretty often. For administrators, what is your first step advice when working with a teacher who reports that a child is struggling and there might be an undiagnosed delay happening?
Well, I think always it's important to listen carefully. When a teacher works up the gumption to come to you and tell you something, that means it's truly important to them. And so I always advocate for listening carefully, asking if you don't get them for specific examples of the concern, because those examples are going to help you pinpoint relevant behaviors and characteristics. They're going to be clues to what is going on. You want to be able to analyze what the teacher is telling you, her observations, in the same way Dr. Montessori thought about and analyzed observations during her time. So you want to schedule an observation by a member of the leadership team as well, in order to get as much detail about what is going on as possible, so that it's easier to make that analysis possible. It's easier to identify the obstacles to learning, just like Dr. Montessori did. And fresh eyes are going to see different things. And that means that your perspectives, both the outside of the classroom and the inside of the classroom, are going to complement each other. And then I think it's really important to be intentional. Classroom-based interventions should be selected with care and implemented, especially if nothing like that has been tried. If you're just using a traditional approach without any interventions, that's really the place to start. And then, of course, you want to be careful about evaluating the effects of the implementation, just so you know what to do and how to proceed.
One of the things that you do is workshops on adapting lessons for learning challenges. What is a common misconception that guides may have about Montessori aligned interventions? What do you hear?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is that so many educators I talk to feel underprepared for the learners of today's classroom. They simply don't know what to do. And then often their default becomes, I don't have the necessary training or expertise, so I'm not a fit for this learner. And perhaps then that extends to Montessori might not even be a fit for this child. I do think the biggest misconception that guides have is that there's very little they can do without the help of so-called experts being brought in. Don't get me wrong, experts are important. I learned a lot from service providers over my time in the classroom. I will never downplay that. But there's a lot that teachers and guides can do without consulting an expert. And this book is really designed and written to dispel that myth that it requires that expert input in the beginning. There's so much that teachers can do without the help of a specialist, things that are simple, easy to understand and implement, that still, as I've said in my definition, maintain that authenticity to Montessori experience for the child and for their peers. So important to me. Most guides just need to know what to do and how to begin. They're very willing to do it if you give them a place to start. And I'm hoping that that is what this book will do.
It's great. So, in your book, it spans educators, families, and servicers. How do you navigate all the conflicting perspectives that can tend to come up with different stakeholders in the child's best interest?
Yeah, that's definitely something that can and does happen. I think in my early work, especially in a federally funded grant called the Circle of Inclusion, it was really designed to figure out how to do inclusion well and what pieces were part of that. And clearly, there was a huge focus for us on collaborative work. And I was blessed early on to work with both service providers and families who chose Montessori and believed in Montessori, were willing to adapt and learn, and conversely, to help me adapt and learn. It was truly a collaborative experience that benefited me, benefited the providers, benefited the family, all in support of the child. Truly this little warm hug that we had around the child. So when there's a conflict, I always think it's really important, again, to listen first and take the most collaborative approach possible. Learn from the experts interacting with the child. They're going to make you a better teacher, not only for that child, but every child to come. Use them to help you become an expert on this child over the course of 3 years, just as you do for their peers. Nobody expects a teacher to be perfect for every single child on day one, but we do hope that you will become an expert on this child over the course of 3 years. That's part of the beauty of the 3-year cycle. I think we all can agree that conflict is easier to resolve when the relationship is based on kindness and respect. So I think it's important for people to focus on what they can do. Relationship building and collaboration starts with you. And so do what you can do as a start and a way to build that strong relationship.
So true. When you're thinking about the classroom, if we were to picture all of the materials on the shelves, which one do you find needs the most adaptation most often? And what's your creative tweak?
Well, honestly, this might not be the answer you or your listeners are expecting, but in the classroom, we're a materials who, and I think our approach is what most often needs a little bit of a shift. For example, using your voice as a tool is a recommendation made in nearly every chapter in the book. How you speak, where you pause, how you use vocal emphasis, all of these things can make a big difference for learners experiencing nearly every difference that the book highlights. That preparation of self is an essential part of our teaching and our training. Again, I'm not stepping outside of Montessori by asking you to prepare yourself. Instead, it is really aligned with the Montessori method and shifting how we interact to meet the needs of struggling learners is an essential part of being a Montessori teacher in today's classrooms. It is an easy, simple practice to adopt, and it can make all the difference. So, for example, think of what the meaning when I say, put the cube on the tower, and how different that is from put the cube on the tower. What I'm teaching in the first one is the action, but what I'm teaching in the second one is a label, a piece of a label for the pink tower itself. And so emphasizing really where that cube needs to go, not next to the tower on the rug, but on the tower itself. How you use your voice and where you put pauses, what emphasis you use can really change what you say and help learners to grasp the essential part of an instruction or the essential part of a presentation of information.
It's such an important idea, and so wonderful to hear that no matter what path we are on, coming back to the self is one of our most important steps.
Absolutely.
So,
I spend a lot of time on myself, and so therefore I think that took on a large role in thinking about helping others prepare to be a good teacher as well.
100%. When we think about all the types of people that might be listening to this podcast or picking up your book, there are those that work in independent schools and those that work in public Montessori schools as well. Within those public schools, sometimes they lack the resources for the interventions that they need. Is there a budget-friendly strategy for equity and serving children?
Yeah, I do think there is. I honestly hope my book will help make up that equity difference for both public and private schools. Public schools often lack the money that they need. Private schools, on the other hand, often lack access to service providers for a quick consultation or to engage in an evaluation when needed. It's a little harder for private schools to take that route than it is for public. So I think there are things that my book can help in both places. There are teachers who want to help in both systems, public and private, but don't know what to do. Empowering educators to take that leap of faith and implement interventions designed to support struggling learners is what this book is about. You don't have to have specialized training to pick up this book, match observed behaviors and characteristics, and then select interventions to try. Many of the interventions are actually changes in how we do what we do. They don't require the purchase of material, expensive training, or a master's degree to effectively implement. They're just good habits to develop. The book can also improve your ability to observe and identify obstacles to learning. And once you can do that, then the path to implementing change is so much easier. So I'm hopeful that the information found in the book will lead to making education easier for both educators in public and private sectors.
Lots of hills to climb for sure.
Yeah.
So within your book, the title includes families. What's a good way for families to advocate for classroom interventions without alienating teachers or the school environment in any way?
Yeah, it's such an important thing to be able to do. At the beginning of the year, my former head of school would send out a checklist every year. And at the top of the list of things to do was bond with the family. And I, as a new young teacher, I was, so full of myself as we all are. And I thought, well, that's silly. Bonding with the child is more important than bonding with the family. And she was right. Bonding with the family is way more important because it helps the child relax. When the family's relaxed, the child is relaxed. That whole bonding piece is such an important part. And I think for families, it's important to understand as they come into a new school that honesty is the best policy. We want you to be open and realistic about your child's needs and strengths. And this is going to allow us as educators to be better prepared and ready to support your child. It's important to build a strong collaborative relationship. So families, I want them to make an effort to get to know teachers and vice versa. Families should make an effort to communicate their child's strengths and needs, emphasize your willingness and your preference to work together to support your child, actively listen and act on suggestions and insights. And then I think most important is to be persistent, but patient in your advocacy. Progress is going to take time to manifest. You want to be open to small steps while keeping sight of long-term goals. Remember, you and the teacher do want the same thing, success for your child. I once had a student included in my classroom named Mohammed. He was 4 when he started. He was really long and lanky and quite active and involved. His disability definition was deaf blindness. He could see and hear, but his impairments were strong enough that he qualified as deaf blind. He also had cerebral palsy, so he wasn't walking, and he had cognitive impacts as well. So he had multiple severe disabilities. His method of moving at home was rolling. Well, mom had recently had a baby, and she couldn't carry this long, lanky 4-year-old and the baby at the same time. She put Mohammed in a stroller, and he went everywhere in this little umbrella collapsible type stroller. At our first meeting, she said he needs to learn to walk. I looked at his physical therapist and said, well, what do we need to do first? She said, he has to develop leg strength. She gave me ways within the classroom to help him develop leg strength. When we took him to a shelf to choose work, number one, the stroller was parked at the door to the classroom. But when we took him to the classroom to choose a shelf to choose work, we put his hands on the shelf and tried to help him lock his legs. Once he could do that, we would leave him until his legs began to buckle, hopefully for more and more time standing each day. The same thing happened when we went to pull out a chair. He balanced on the chair, locked his legs, practiced standing. After he sat in the chair, or before he sat in the chair, we moved him to the table. He again practiced leg strength. So everywhere he went, everything he did, there was leg strength, and learning to stand and lock his legs and keep himself upright was a piece of that. Those were little teeny tiny steps, but it's where we had to begin. And I wanted to find a way to do it within the classroom that didn't involve a lot of special equipment coming in. His therapist, physical therapist, still came and worked with him and sometimes pulled him out, but usually in the classroom. But we were doing the vast majority of the work by working on that leg strength. And he, in a couple of years, did leave using a walker from my classroom. But I'm not sure we all would have been as focused on walking had his mother not been that persistent but patient and firm advocate for Mohammed learning to walk.
Wow, that's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing me. When I think about classrooms and who we are as Montessorians, how we believe fully in all the things that we've learned, sometimes I find that there can be a bit of resistance to adaptations.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because I'm not only going to get it, but practitioners following examples of my book might get it as well. So I want to answer that with another story. The very first student with an identified disability I included was a really sweet 4-year-old with a severe visual impairment. She had no residual sight, and that means she didn't see anything at all, including strong light. Flashed in her eye, caused no reaction. She couldn't see it. I did have help from a really great TVI who did not spend a lot of time in the classroom, but consulted with me because I was the one who needed to learn how to help her learn. I told her I wanted to start with practical life, and I explained that the goals were developing order, independence, concentration, coordination. Those were the direct aims of the activity, a simple thing like pouring water into a basin. She asked to watch me give her a lesson so she could see what it looked like. And then she's helped me think through what a child without any vision was missing. And when you think about it, that's nearly everything, right? Vision is such an important information gathering sense for typically developing children. We really count on that information gathering sense to be working in a Montessori classroom. And then she helped me identify what this child's information gathering senses really were. And of course, touch and auditory input were her most important information gathering senses. So that meant I had to adjust my presentation to allow her access to the material by using those two senses. I allowed her to feel the materials before I started giving the lesson, and I named them as she felt them. And often named parts, the handle of the pitcher, the spout, as she felt those. I allowed her to place her hands on mine so that she could feel the movements I was making. And during a time when I had learned to be quiet while presenting to a young child, I instead added descriptive language to the lesson so that she understood what she was feeling. And if she had questions, I answered them. And remember, this was really early in my teaching career when most guides are dependent upon their albums. That glow of training is still surrounding us. We want to present things just so. And I was still that kind of guide for her and for her peers, but I also had the additional experience of imagining how to make the materials in the community accessible, how to make the environment hers, just as it was for every child in the classroom. In 2 years, she went from sitting in the corner of a daycare doing very little to nothing, to independently navigating our classroom, making work choices, completing work cycles, serving and eating and cleaning up after her snack, finding the bathroom, which was located just outside our classroom, finding and navigating our playground independently, and then also interacting with her peers and making true reciprocal friendships. And I only brought two things into the classroom for. The first was a substitute for the sandpaper letters. Sandpaper letters were not going to be the way she communicated or read. Letters weren't. And so her equivalent were 3 6-space muffin tins and small balls so that I could teach Braille. Braille's made up of various configurations of 6 dots. So that 6-space muffin tin and the balls allowed us both to create Braille letters. This meant I could use a 3-period lesson to teach her just like anyone else. This is as a first period, touch and find as a second period. And as a third period, what does this configuration after you touch it say? I also added Braille labels for all academic materials that she used. So those were really the only 2 changes I made to the classroom. So from the beginning, as I said, my goal was to keep the room and the experience as authentically Montessori as possible for both this child and her peers and any child that followed her. I've always resisted the urge to bring in that new shiny thing. I have remained unwavering in my faith in the materials and the methodology to meet the needs of all children. And I think that is reflected in the interventions in this book. These interventions are designed to enhance children's ability to use the materials, participate in activities and interactions with others, and support the work that allows children to demonstrate their learning and development. And so adapting what we do within the framework of our Montessori methodology, I think is truly what Dr. Montessori, the scientist and the educator, wanted us to do. She wanted us to follow the child, no matter who that child is and no matter what their capabilities or differences may be.
It seems like with the right tools and the right information, we can serve every child. I have one more question for you. If you were to add one sentence to Montessori teacher training manuals worldwide, what would it be?
Ooh, that is a great question. How about Dr. Montessori's materials and methodology universally support the strengths, interests, and needs of children, both when their development follows the expected path and when their development differs from that of their peers.
Well said. I feel like I have had the opportunity to receive this wonderful gift by listening to you. I feel like I've attended a masterclass. What I hear all the time from school leaders and educators is that diverse needs are increasing, that people both in private and public Montessori spaces are receiving more children that need their support and they need to broaden their toolbox. And I really feel like you have something special here in this book and in all that you have learned and amassed over the years.
That's really kind of you. Thank you. And that's honestly my hope. I just didn't want this information that I'd gathered over my career and, in the many projects I've been involved in, I didn't want it to die in my head or in my computer someday when I was gone. It really became my mission in thinking about this book to put that information out there because over and over again, I encounter people who just want to know what to do. So I appreciate the opportunity to share my blend of philosophy and action-oriented steps with you and your listeners. And I'm quite grateful for you reaching out to me. And I'm glad we connected.
Thank you so much. And friends, if you're looking for this, it's called The Montessori Approach to Classroom-Based Interventions by Pam Shanks. Please grab a copy. I think that it's so rich and children will all be better for it.
Thank you. It's currently available on Amazon. My publisher is Joe Campbell of Montessori Services. Eventually, it will be on his website, but as of this recording, it's available only on Amazon. And please reach out to me if you ever have questions or concerns. I'm always open to helping anybody out there who is supporting children with learning differences. It is my passion.
Thank you so much again for joining us today. And thank you to the listeners. We hope you join us again soon. Have a great one.